Gasping and slummed, home silent. He won, but joy tasted like ash. The door creaked open, and shadows stretched across the floor. He knew they were coming. The ticket was supposed to be his salvation, but now it felt like a death sentence. How had it come to this? The answer lay in the weeks leading up to this moment, a spiral of greed, betrayal, and desperation. Just a month ago, Thomas Reed was an ordinary man living an ordinary life. A factory worker by day, a father by night, his days blended into a predictable rhythm. But beneath the surface, Thomas dreamed of more. The lottery ticket he bought on a whim was his escape, a chance to rewrite his story. He didn't know then that luck is a double-edged sword, cutting through lies with indiscriminate precision. That ticket, now stained with blood, was the catalyst for a chain of events that would unravel everything he held dear. The first sign of trouble came the night Thomas checked the numbers. His heart raced as he realized he'd won 10 million. But as he celebrated, he failed to notice the cashier's lingering gaze, the way the man's eyes narrowed as he handed Thomas his receipt. That cashier, a small-time hustler named Eddie, saw an opportunity. He knew Thomas, knew he was vulnerable, and in the criminal underworld, vulnerability is a beacon, drawing predators like moths to a flame. Eddie's mind began to race, plotting how to turn Thomas's windfall into his own payday. Eddie approached Thomas with an offer. "Protection. You're a target now," he said, his voice slick with false concern. "I know people who can keep you safe for a price." Thomas, naive and overwhelmed, agreed. But protection, in Eddie's world, was a euphemism for extortion. The more Thomas paid, the more Eddie demanded. The lottery ticket, once a symbol of hope, became a curse, binding Thomas to a web of lies and threats. He was drowning, and Eddie was the anchor pulling him under. Thomas's life began to unravel. He withdrew from his family, haunted by the secret of his winnings and the growing debt to Eddie. The money that was supposed to set him free became a prison. He started drinking, the bottle his only solace. His wife, Sarah, noticed the change but couldn't pierce the wall he'd built. The lottery ticket, now hidden in a shoebox under the bed, was a constant reminder of his folly. He had gambled with fate, and fate was winning. The threats escalated. Eddie's enforcers began showing up at Thomas's house, their presence a silent menace. One night, after a particularly violent encounter, Thomas snapped. He grabbed the lottery ticket, determined to end the nightmare. But Eddie was one step ahead. He had no intention of letting Thomas off the hook. The ticket was worth more than money, it was power, and Eddie would do whatever it took to keep it. Thomas devised a plan. He would meet Eddie, hand over the ticket, and demand an end to the harassment. But plans born of desperation rarely go as intended. He chose an abandoned warehouse as the meeting spot, unaware that Eddie had his own agenda. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything. The warehouse was eerily silent as Thomas waited. When Eddie arrived, he wasn't alone. Two henchmen flanked him, their faces obscured by hoods. Thomas's heart pounded as he handed over the ticket, but Eddie just smirked. "You really think it's that easy?" he said, his voice dripping with malice. The tension was palpable, a storm about to break. Eddie's betrayal was swift and brutal. He took the ticket but refused to let Thomas go. "You know too much," he said, raising a gun. Thomas's mind raced. He had trusted the wrong person, and now he was paying the ultimate price. But fate had one last twist in store. Thomas fought back, disarming one of Eddie's men and making a desperate run for it. The night was a blur of shadows and pain as he fled, the ticket clutched in his hand. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to survive. As Thomas hid, he realized the ticket was more than a prize, it was a target. He couldn't cash it without exposing himself, but he couldn't destroy it either. It was a cursed object, a symbol of his downfall. He began to see the lottery for what it truly was, a game of chance where the house always wins. Eddie found him, as Thomas knew he would. The confrontation was inevitable, a clash of desperation and greed. Thomas tried to reason with him, but Eddie was beyond reason. The ticket had consumed them both, a shared obsession that could only end in tragedy. The fight was brief but brutal. Thomas fought with everything he had, but Eddie's knife found its mark. As Thomas fell, he thought of his family, of the life he'd lost. The ticket slipped from his hand, landing in the blood pooling beneath him. The police found Thomas's body the next morning, the ticket still clutched in his hand. Eddie was arrested, but the damage was done. The lottery ticket, now evidence, was a grim reminder of how quickly fortune can turn to ruin. Thomas's family never cashed the ticket. To them, it was a symbol of loss, not gain. They buried him quietly, their grief a private affair. The ticket, once a beacon of hope, became a cautionary tale, a reminder that some prizes come at too high a cost. And so, the story of Thomas Reed faded into obscurity, a footnote in the annals of true crime, but a lesson etched in the hearts of those who knew him. Detective Laura Hayes sifted through the evidence, her sharp eyes catching every detail. The blood-stained lottery ticket was the centerpiece of the case, but the story behind it was murky. Witnesses spoke of Thomas's paranoia, his sudden wealth, and his ties to Eddie. Laura knew there was more to this than a simple robbery gone wrong. The ticket was a thread, and she was determined to pull it until the whole truth unraveled. In Eddie's apartment, Laura found a ledger. Its pages were filled with transactions, names, and amounts, evidence of a sprawling extortion ring. Thomas's name appeared multiple times, each entry marking a payment made under duress. The ledger was a map of Eddie's empire, and Laura realized Thomas was just one of many victims. The lottery ticket was the tip of an iceberg, and beneath the surface lay a world of corruption. Laura tracked down others named in the ledger, ordinary people whose lives had been upended by Eddie's schemes. They spoke of threats, violence, and the crushing weight of debt. The lottery ticket wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern, a system designed to exploit hope. Laura's resolve hardened. She would bring Eddie to justice, not just for Thomas, but for all of them. The breakthrough came when Laura uncovered surveillance footage of Eddie meeting with a high-ranking local official. The exchange was brief but damning proof that Eddie's operation had powerful allies. The lottery ticket was more than a prize. It was a tool used to manipulate and control. Laura knew she was treading dangerous ground, but she couldn't stop now. Confronted with the evidence, Eddie cracked. He confessed to extortion, but he refused to name his accomplices. "You think this ends with me?" he sneered. "You have no idea what you're up against." Laura pressed him, but Eddie was a man who knew how to play the game. He would take the fall, but the system would remain intact. Laura's investigation led to the arrest of the officials seen in the footage. The scandal rocked the city, exposing a network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of power. The lottery ticket, once a symbol of greed, became a catalyst for change. But for Laura, the victory was bittersweet. Thomas was still gone, and no amount of justice could bring him back. Thomas's family held a vigil in his memory. The community came together, their grief a testament to the man he had been before the ticket changed everything. Laura attended, her presence a silent promise that his death would not be in vain. The lottery ticket, now a relic of a broken system, served as a reminder of the cost of unchecked greed. In the end, the lottery went on, its promise of wealth undimmed. But for those who knew Thomas's story, the ticket was no longer just a game. It was a cautionary tale, a reminder that fortune is fleeting and that some prizes come at too high a cost. Laura returned to her work, her resolve unshaken. The world was full of Eddies and Thomases, and she would be there to tip the scales in favor of justice. As the machine printed another ticket, its numbers glinting under the light, the cycle began anew. But somewhere, someone would remember Thomas Reed and the price he paid for a chance at a better life. Months after Eddie's arrest, an anonymous package arrived at Laura's office. Inside were documents detailing the full extent of the corruption network, names, dates, and transactions that went far beyond what she had uncovered. The whistleblower's identity remained a mystery, but the information was a goldmine. Laura knew this was her chance to dismantle the entire operation. The lottery ticket had started it all, but now it was about more than money, it was about justice. Armed with the new evidence, Laura led a series of raids across the city. High-profile figures were arrested, their lavish lifestyles exposed as facades built on exploitation. The raids made headlines, and the public began to demand accountability. The lottery ticket, once a symbol of hope and despair, now represented a turning point in the fight against corruption. But Laura knew the battle was far from over. The trials were swift and decisive. Eddie, now a cooperating witness, provided testimony that sealed the fate of his former allies. The official Laura had arrested was sentenced to decades in prison, and the network began to crumble. But the victory came at a cost. Laura received threats, her safety compromised by those who still lurked in the shadows. She refused to back down, driven by the memory of Thomas and the countless others who had suffered. As the dust settled, the city began to heal. Reforms were implemented to prevent future exploitation, and the lottery system was overhauled to ensure transparency. Thomas's family, though still grieving, found solace in knowing his death had sparked change. Sunrise hope, lottery's legacy. Hope dawns. Justice's fight continues.